Hello again, everyone. Nice to see you all. Several weeks ago, I started preparing for this lecture, and I saw in the program, the proposed program, there was Shostakovich string quartet. As you may know, Shostakovich was from the Ukraine, as it was called then, the Ukraine. And I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity to investigate his role in a repressive regime. And not a lot, but several high-profile Russian artists these days have been fired from their posts because of the lack of saying anything against the current war. In fact, cozying up to Putin. Valery Gergiev was fired from the Munich Philharmonic, from the Rotterdam Philharmonic. The Vienna Philharmonic canceled him. Anna Netrebko, world-famous singer, was fired by the Met for her lack of saying anything against the war. But then, got a message from Carol, the program's changed. So Britten and Shostakovich were out, and Mozart and Mendelssohn were in. I said, oh, now what am I going to do? Because, how much more can I say about Mozart that has not already been said? So I said, all right, let's see what the Mendelssohn is. And I looked at it and said, oh, it's Fanny. It's not Felix, it's Fanny, his sister. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, hands up, how many have ever heard a piece by Fanny Mendelssohn? That's pretty good. You notice my hand was not up. Up until this time, I had never heard a piece by her. And actually, you may have heard a piece by her, but you didn't know it. And I'll get to that later. But she starts to show up now on concert programs because there's an emphasis on neglected women composers. What woman composer isn't neglected? And I just noticed that the Boston Symphony last week or the week before did her overture in C, which I'll talk about later. 450 plus compositions. Piano trio, piano quartet, orchestral overture, 4 cantatas, 125 pieces for piano, and over 250 lieder. She was born in Hamburg, 1805, the oldest of 4 children. Felix was the next one in line. He was 4 years younger than her. And her grandfather was the famous Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn. It was a non-religious family, and they were all baptized in 1816 to downplay their Jewish origins. We can see, again, it was not advantageous to be a Jew in Berlin, if it ever has been. This is her full name, Fanny Cecilia Mendelssohn Bartholdy. You'll see Felix is named with the hyphen Bartholdy afterwards, and that was because of the baptism in 1816. The 2 siblings, Felix and Fanny, developed a very close relationship, and they first started studying piano with their mother. And when she was 14, she played all of Bach's preludes from the Well-Tempered Clavier by memory for her father on his birthday. The father said, well, that's very well, dear, but you're a girl, so you can't be a musician. You've got to stay home and make the lives of men better. It was a typical 19th century thought. If you remember when I talked about Clara Schumann a couple years ago, she suffered under the same onus, that she was a woman. She couldn't be a concert pianist or a composer. So it was very, very common. Now, Felix and Fanny had composition lessons from this man, Carl Friedrich Zelter. He was the teacher of Meyerbeer and of Otto Nicolai. Nicolai was the composer of The Merry Wives of Windsor. And he actually at one point wrote that he favored Fanny for her piano playing above Felix. And he gave her the highest praise at the time. She plays like a man. This is Fanny. And she wrote, when she was 17 years old, Felix was 13, she said, "Up to the present moment, I possess his unbounded confidence. I have watched the progress of his talent step by step, and may say I have contributed to his development. I have always been his only musical advisor. He never writes down a thought before submitting it to my judgment." But her father said, "From my knowledge of Fanny, I should say that she has neither inclination nor vocation for authorship. She is too much all that a woman ought to be for this. She regulates her house and neither thinks of the public nor of the musical world, nor even of music at all, until her first duties are fulfilled. Publishing would only disturb her in these, and I cannot say that I approve of it." Now, her first large-scale work was a piano quartet that was written with the assistance of Zelter, her teacher. Now, I'm going to play you a little bit of this, and you'll notice there is a lot of repetition in her ideas. Especially, you'll hear this opening chord sequence, and it keeps repeating. And not much development takes place in this piece, which is typical of her early larger compositions. So here is a piano quartet. For 1822, she was 17. So you can hear that repetition. She doesn't seem to take it any further than that. And she was aware of a deficiency. She said to Felix, quote, "I lack the ability to sustain ideas properly and give them the needed consistency. Therefore, lieder suits me best, in which, if need be, merely a pretty idea without much potential for development can suffice." So she was aware that she needed to develop more. And she was very successful in writing lieder. In fact, in 1826, Felix arranged to have 6 of her songs published under his name, not her name. 3 in his Opus 8 and 3 in his Opus 9. But he discouraged her from publishing under her own name. Maybe he thought she would gain more fame than he. Felix was very popular in England, and especially in the court of Victoria and Albert. He visited often. In 1842, the Queen had him at Buckingham Palace and told him that she wanted to sing for him one of her favorite songs that Felix had written. It's this one. Oh, that's Felix playing for Victoria and Albert. This is the song, Italian, Italy.
Die Sonne blaue die Luft,
Why am I playing a piece by Felix? Because it wasn't by him. This is one of the songs that he published under his name. And he fessed up. He fessed up to the Queen. Well, I didn't write that. My sister did. It's good for him. When she was 22, she made her debut as a pianist, playing Felix's first piano concerto. And according to Felix, there are only 3 known instances of her public performances. When she was 24, she married Wilhelm Hensel. And so she started to use the name Fanny Hensel. Sometimes you'll see it Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel, but she dropped the Mendelssohn altogether. On some of her published works, it'll have her name, then below it is Geboren Mendelssohn Bartholdy. But she always went by the name Hensel. And they had one son, born 2 years later, Sebastian. She even wrote the music for their wedding, the night before the wedding. Felix had promised to write music and never came through. So she just the night before, and she apparently was up after midnight writing the organ music, and she even wanted to play herself, but her friends talked her out of it. So, and here is the piece that she wrote right before the wedding. Now, her husband, Wilhelm, was very supportive of her composition and even supported her publishing her works. This is the music room in their home in Berlin. It was at Leipziger Strasse 3 in Berlin. And now that's what's there. It's not the original house. This is the Bundesrat, which is comparable to our U.S. Senate. This is a painting from outside in the garden into that room. So it's very popular Sunday concerts that they put on for a long time. And they were very well attended. Liszt came, Clara Schumann came, Heinrich Heine came, and they even had her overture premiered there in 1830. Now here again, you're going to notice some repetition of ideas. And if any of you know Felix's overture to the Midsummer Night's Dream, at one point toward the end of this, you're going to hear something that's very reminiscent of a section in the Midsummer Night's Dream Overture. I'm sure there was some cross-pollination. Felix's piece came first, so who knows? I'll point that out when we get to it. Here. Here again. So can you hear the repetition? She has one idea and she repeats it again, and then it seems like she runs out of ideas and stops and goes on to something else. Now, I'm not criticizing her work. She was a very, very good composer, but she knew that she had some development to do. And as she said, merely a pretty idea without much potential for development can suffice, and that's why Lieder seemed to suit her best. She did compose four large-scale works, 3 cantatas in 1831. One was for her son's first birthday. This is her and Sebastian, drawn by Wilhelm. One cantata on the subject of Job. The most elaborate that she wrote was in response to the cholera pandemic in Berlin in 1831-32. And this is probably the largest piece that she wrote. It's in 16 sections, 8-part chorus. So we'll hear a bit about from this the final chorus. No, there's real firmness. She's got a good grasp of what she wants to do in this piece. It's very powerful. So she was developing, as you can see. In 1841, she published a cycle of piano pieces called Das Jahr, the year. Each piece was representative of a different month. And they were all on colored paper, different colored paper, and they were all illustrated by Wilhelm. And Felix and Fanny, in their correspondence, were even considering writing a group of operas on the Nibelungenlied. You know what the Nibelungenlied is? Wagner the Ring Cycle. Can you imagine a ring cycle from Fanny and Felix? That would have been quite something. Finally, she was 30. She did publish a selection of songs. This is her Opus 1 songs. And most of her songs are all strophic. They're not what we call through composed. They don't start and go the whole way to the end with developing ideas the whole way to the end. It's like a hymn. You have one verse, piano goes back to the beginning, you have the next verse and the next verse. So this is Opus 1, number 1. Very beautiful song, isn't it? She really can grasp the feeling of a poem. The songs aren't long. This is about the typical length, about 1.5, 2.5 minutes. Now we come to the work on the program, her string quartet. She wrote one, and she's probably the earliest example of a woman writing a string quartet in the 19th century. Now here I did some investigation to see if there were any others in the 19th century. Any names leap off the page? Has anybody here heard any of those composers? I certainly haven't. This quartet's very powerful work, and it's in kind of an unconventional mode. Starts off with a slow movement, which is rather short, followed by a scherzo, and then the emotional center of the piece is the third movement, a romanza. Usually the longest movement is the first movement, and they get shorter as you go on. But I said unconventional, but it's not really that unconventional when you think of she wrote after Beethoven, and Beethoven just completely not destroyed, but remade the structure of what we think a string quartet should be, that Haydn wrote. Starts with a fast movement, you have a slow movement, you have a minuet or scherzo, and you have a finale. But this starts with the slow movement first, scherzo next, then romanza the third, and the longest movement is the fourth. So this is very assured writing. She lamented that she didn't have enough, what she thought was enough facility to write for string parts. She never studied violin or any other strings. But this, I mean, you can hear it, especially in the last movement. Very, very good handling of the violin. See if we have a little bit of time for the third movement first. I'm sorry, this is the second movement. And now some of the fourth movement. For someone who admitted that she didn't know very much about string writing or thought she should know more, that's very assured, dynamic writing. She died in 1847 from a stroke while she was rehearsing one of Felix's cantatas in Berlin. Less than 6 months later, Felix died of the same condition, stroke. Strokes also killed her mother and father and the grandfather, Moses. So there must have been some kind of a genetic background to that. It's not the end of the story, though. In 1828, when she was 23, there's a mention in her diary of an Easter sonata that she played for Felix. It was considered lost, and people forgot about it until 1970. It was discovered in a French bookshop, bought by, it said Easter Sonata F. Mendelssohn. It was bought, subsequently recorded under the name Felix. But then in 2010, there was an American musicologist, Angela Mace Christian, heard it and had some ideas it might be by Fanny. So she got in touch with the person that bought the manuscript, and he said, no, it's Felix. It's too masculine. It's a masterpiece. Can't be by Fanny. But in Berlin, in one of the museums, there's a bound book of Fanny's workbook of her compositions, and there are 30 pages missing. She got a hold of the guy that bought the manuscript, and she examined it. There are all kinds of crossing outs, notes in the margin, and everything, so it wasn't a copy. She didn't copy something by Felix. And it turned out the pages were numbered. There were exact number of the pages that were missing in the book in the museum. So it was finally attributed to Fanny. Play a little bit of that. Berlin. There's an inscription, if you can just make it out, 2 lines of music. These are the words. This is taken from the last composition she ever wrote. And notice that is the last line of the last composition that she wrote the day before she died. So let's hear some of that, and I'll end my presentation with this piece. Bergeslust.
Lust vom Berg zu schauen, weit über Wald und Strom, hoch über sich den blauen, den klaren Himmelsdom, hoch über sich den blauen, tiefklaren Himmelsdom. Vom Berge Vögel fliegen, zu Wolken so geschnellt, Gedanken überfragen die Wellen und den Wind. Überfliegen die Vögel und den Wind, die Vögel und den Wind. Die Wolken ziehen hernieder, das Vöglein senkt sich gleich, Gedanken gehen und Lieder bis in das Himmelreich, Gedanken gehen, Gedanken bis in das Himmelreich.
Very beautiful. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for coming, and hope you enjoy the concert. Thank you.